Okay, everybody? We're going to start the Shiur. First of all, thank you everybody for coming. I missed you guys last week. That's the truth. I'm sorry I wasn't here, but Baruch Hashem, it's good to be back. I was thinking about what the right approach to be for this class would be. You know, to continue on the weekly parasha. This week's parasha is Parashat Truma. It's a beautiful parasha. There's a lot of depth, a lot going on in Parashat Truma. Lots to speak about. The building of the Mishkan, where Hashem wants us to hold Him, where we ought to carve out Torah within our hearts, where Torah places within the lives of our complexities, the way we go through life on a day-to-day basis. It's very busy. How do we put Judaism within the mix of all of this, right? And that's really what this week's parasha touches on. But last week's parasha, we didn't really get to hit on, and I feel like it's very important to do so. So last week's parasha is important for many reasons. One of those being that it's the first parasha that follows Matan Torah, right? The whole reason that we're the Jewish nation, the whole reason that we became who we are, the people of the book, the people that follow Hashem, the people that are unified under one Hashem Echad, is that we have the Torah Kedusha. We have the Torah that unifies us, the Torah that teaches us how to live and how we ought to behave, right? And the parasha that follows that parasha, Parashat Yitro, is Parashat Mishpatim, which lists out all of the laws between Ben Adam Habero, man to man. You know, it's easy to say that to be a religious Jew, you got to put on tefillin, you got to keep Shabbos, you got to do all the godly things, all the things that are lofty, all the things that connect us to a higher power. But in many instances, a lot of times these mitzvot, they can get lost in translation. What does it mean to behave towards our fellow Jew? What does it mean to understand what it is to model what the Torah is? You know, to learn it, to know it as a chokhmah, to learn it and know it as a work of knowledge is one thing. But how do you live as a Torah Jew? That's the focus of Parashat Mishpatim. Parashat Mishpatim shows not only how much you should know and the mitzvot that you have to do between us and God, but what about the mitzvot between man and man? What's going on over there? And another reason why Parashat Mishpatim is so special to me specifically is because my son was born Parashat Mishpatim. Specifically, you as well? Yeah? Specifically, on the yard site of one of the founders of the Baal Musar movement, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. One of the founders of what Musar is. And tonight, I want to dig into that. I want to go into what Musar is. Because for me, when I started learning Torah, when I started understanding from my Rebbeim, from my Rebbes, how to live as a Torah Jew, what Musar is, I learned from what I saw and not from what I heard. And that's the foundation of what Musar is. So first, I want to start really with a story of a great rabbi, Rav Shlomo Luria. His name is the Marashal. The Marashal was a tremendous tzaddik. Lived, I think, in the 1600s. Tremendous Gaon Nifla. He wrote on Shas, he wrote on Gemara, he wrote on the Halakha, he wrote on Shulchan Aruch. He has commentary all throughout the Torah, across all different aspects. Halakha, Chumash, Gemara, Mishnah, everything. He was a tremendous Gaon, the Marashal. The Marashal, fascinatingly enough, he lived in a small town, I think somewhere in Lublin in Poland. And there came a time where there was a man, and this man was standing by the sickbed, the deathbed of his wife. And he's trying to appease her, he's trying to say, listen, the life that we lived, the family that we grew together, everything that we sacrificed for, this was built by us. We sacrificed each other, we sacrificed of ourselves to build our kids, our family, our home. I promise I'm never going to leave you. And even if you go to the next world and Hashem takes your neshama, I promise I won't marry another person. That's my promise to you. And he says this to her as a dying wish, as a nechama, that maybe when she does go, she'll go a little bit more in peace. And with those words, her neshama is returned to Hashem. And with that shvuah, with that promise, that's when he leaves his wife. 30 days goes by, 60 days goes by, he's without his wife, his home is empty, his kids are out of the house, his wife is not there, and he's thinking back to the promise of his wife. He's saying, I promised her I would never marry again. I promised I would never marry another person. But the pain, the plague of loneliness is really coming upon me. I don't know what to do. So this man, he goes and knocks on the door of the Marashal. And he says, listen, Rabbi, I made a shvuah, I made a promise, I made a neder. Anybody who knows the significance, the power, the koach of what it means to make a neder, to make a promise, it's binding. When a person says his word is his word. He takes his word to the grave. So much so that before Rosh Hashanah, we do something called Hatarat Nidarim. That if we ever made a promise throughout the year that we weren't able to fulfill or that we didn't fulfill entirely, we sit in front of a court of a bedin of 3 people and we say all of it is annulled, it's nullified, so that when we walk into Rosh Hashanah, we're clean, no promises. But he says, Rabbi, listen, I made a promise to my wife. Is it binding? Can I really not marry another? Can I really not restart my life? with someone else? So the Marshal answers him like this. He says, to get married, to have children, to start a family, that's a mitzvah from the Torah. That's a mitzvah that Hashem gave to you. It was never up to you. It was never for you to nullify it in the first place. And so therefore, that promise, it was never binding to begin with. He says, you have no problems. Go find another person, start your life again. Go be happy, find shalom, find another. And that's what he did. 60 days, 90 days, 3, 4, 5 months went by. He found another woman. He goes, he dates, he marries. Finally, he's b'simcha. He has someone to build a life with again. 30 days after the chuppah, exactly 30 days after the chuppah, this man, he lays in his bed, he never wakes up again, and he dies. Now this wife, now she's furious. She says, I knew it. See, and she goes to knock on the door of the Marshal. She says, Rabbi, why did you tell him that he can marry again? You and I both know that because you gave him permission to marry again, he broke the promise, there was a Gzeran Shamayim, Hashem took him because he broke his neder. What's going on over here? You took my husband away from him. And the Marshal's thinking to himself, he says, there's nothing that I said that was against halakha. I know exactly what the halakha is. I know what the law is. I know what the deen is. There's no way that he died because of this. It's impossible. He spent the whole night, Marshal, putting pen to parchment, and he wrote something called a teshuvah. A she'ila, the teshuvah, a question and an answer. Pages and pages and pages on why his psak, why his ruling was correct, and why it was emet. He takes this ruling early in the morning, and he goes to the grave of this man. He slips it into the ground. And the moment he slips it into the ground, this man, he stands up. Now, you're going to look at me, you're going to say, listen, this story is fantasy. This story is hocus pocus. It was recorded in the Sfarim of the Chachmei of Lublin, of the people of the town of Lublin, that they saw it firsthand and passed down from community to community, that we have it today. The story is recorded. Now, first of all, as an aside, how does such a thing happen? Such a thing happens is because when Moshe was mikabel Torah from Sinai, when Moshe Rabbeinu got the Torah for us, we now have the providence of the Torah itself. We are in control of what that Torah rules over. The Chachamim are, the rabbis are. That means it's for us to interpret, for us to follow, for us to lead with. And so when the Chachamim, they make a psak, Shamayim has to follow the psak of the rabbis in this world. And that's how it was. He stands up. He walks hand in hand with this man through the city of the townspeople. The very town people that were just at the funeral, just 1 week earlier. Now he's walking around with this man, and he goes to this woman's door. He knocks on the door, and she's flabbergasted. She says, my husband. And they embrace and they hug, and they live. 30 days later, again, she goes back to the rabbi. She says, Rabbi, I'm very grateful. I'm very happy that you brought my husband back to life, but, ever since he came back, he hasn't really been happy. I feel like he's dead. I feel like he's dead inside. I don't know, he must have died or something. I don't know. There's something about him that it's hard for me to love him, I don't know what to do. So the rabbi says, I'll help you again. I'm going to pray with all my heart that this man and you are going to have that same connection, that same feeling that you had when you just got married, before he passed away, so that you guys can live ad until end, all the way with happiness and simcha, betul levav. And that's what he did. He prayed with all his heart, and this man, he returned back to the way he was, to the level of simcha. That was the story of the Marshal. Say the Baalei Musar, say all the people that are the progenitors of the Musar movement, the rebuke movement, the betterment program, the self-help world, they all say that there were 2 miracles that took place in this story. The first miracle was that he brought this man back to life, for sure. That's the first miracle. But the second miracle, which the rabbis say, the Chachamim say, which is even greater than the first miracle, was that they were able to change one midah in a person, one character trait in a person, which is greater than bringing someone back to life. What he was able to do was bring simcha, bring happiness in a man who no longer had it. To bring an emotion to a person who had lost it. And the Chachamim, they say that miracle is greater than bringing him back to life. What does that mean? What does it mean to change one midah, to change one character trait is greater than bringing him back to life? How do we even understand that? A person can live 120 years with anger, with jealousy, with all these different negative character traits, even positive ones, and work his whole life to change them. And the Chachamim say, the Baalei Musar, they teach us that it's easier to learn all of Shas. It's easier to learn all of the Torah than it is to change one character trait in a person. To learn the Talmud, to learn the Gemara, to learn the Mishnah, all these things, you sit, you have some time, you sit with a chavrusa, with a study partner, and you learn it. But to work on your anger, to work on your jealousy, to work on what it means to be a mensch, to be a person that lives the Torah world, to live the way of a Torah man, to live of a yid, of a woman, that can take an entire lifetime. That is more of a miracle. Who was Rabbi Yisrael Salanter? Who was this founder of the Musar movement? Where did he get his start from? I'll tell you. There's a famous story that's told in the name of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, and he says like this. There was a very poor city, and there was one butcher that it was for the entire town. He was the one who did shechita, he was the one that slaughtered the animals, the cows, the chickens, all the livestock, and everyone would go to him for the kosher shechita. And it came time that the wheel of fortune had turned all the way around, and finally his luck came back to him. He was very poor, and now finally he'd got his fortune. Some turn of luck, he got an inheritance, and he became a millionaire. And there was someone in the town that within him was a seething jealousy. This poor man, this butcher, is going to have wealth, is going to have money. I worked my whole life. I sacrificed everything for the money that I have, for the life that I've built. This man in one stroke of fate is going to have more than me. I can't live with that. So what happened was, the butcher was making a wedding for his only daughter. He collected everything that he could, invited the whole town, invited everyone that he could for the simcha of his only daughter to get married. And that's what it was. He invited everyone, including this one man that was incredibly jealous of him. And what this butcher was, he was greeting everyone, Shalom Aleichem, thank you so much for coming, such a simcha, it's great that you came, so on and so forth. And finally, at the time of the chuppah, at the time where he's standing with his daughter and his future son-in-law, this jealous man, he goes up to the butcher, and he holds up his shoe. And he says, you see the stain on my shoe? Could you clean it for me? Could you clean it for me? Could you fix this little scratch that I have on my shoe? In the height of his happiness, in the height of his simcha, he embarrassed him in front of the entire town, in front of everyone. And this story got back to Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. He says that we're going to have a town that learns Torah, that learns Gemara, that learns Mishnah, and people that act like this, he said, not on my watch. And from that moment, he vowed to himself to not only teach what the Torah has to offer in terms of Gemara, in terms of Chokhmah, in terms of knowledge, but how it means to live, how it means to act. And I use him as my mentor. I use him as my Rebbe. When I learn from someone, I want to see more how he acts, what he does, more so than what he says. Because a person like that you can learn from. A person like that you can see how he behaves. He's embodying the Torah that he teaches. And so that brings us to Parashat Mishpatim. Last week's parasha, fascinating, talks about Eved Ivri. It talks about a slave who did something wrong. He stole. He did something that he wasn't supposed to do. And in a way to pay back his debt, there's a master that's put over him. There's someone that takes him as a slave. And in a way, he rehabilitates him. He lives in his home. He gives him meals. He gives him a place to sleep, and so on and so forth. But after 6 years of this man being a slave, of paying back his debt for what he stole, for what he did wrong, for what he wasn't supposed to do, after 6 years, he's supposed to go free. That's the law. After 6 years, he goes free. That's the law of the Eved Ivri. But sometimes it happens like this, where the Eved Ivri, he says, listen, I love my place. I love where I am. I love my master. I love my wife. I don't want to leave. I love where I am. So what does the halacha say about Eved Ivri? What does the Torah teach? That you take this slave, you take this Eved Ivri, you take his ear, and you pierce a hole at the doorpost of the door. This is very interesting. This is not understood logically. What's the reason you do that? What's the reason you take his ear and you poke a hole at the post of the door? What's the reason you do that? This is the question of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, and he strengthens the question even further. He says, who is the person that's supposed to poke that hole in the ear? The master himself. So he says, I don't understand. You have this Eved Ivri, who didn't want to leave his master's home. He's very comfortable. He likes the life that he lives. He likes serving his master. He likes doing what he's doing. He's very comfortable in his home. But what did the master do wrong that he's the one that has to pierce the hole? Let it be someone else. Let him do it himself. Let someone else do it. Why, in a sense, is the master also being punished? This is the question of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. And he strengthens the question even further. He says like this. When a person has a Jewish slave in his home, what are the laws of a Jewish slave? It says that if a person has 2 steaks, he has to share one of those steaks with his slave. If the master has 1 pillow, he's obligated to give that pillow to the slave. He's obligated to make the slave almost like his master. So what does the one who purchases the slave even get from this transaction? He gets nothing from it. On one hand, he has a servant who's going to be able to help him and serve him and do what he needs to do. But on the other hand, this owner, this man who's purchasing of this Eved Ivri, has to treat him better than he treats himself in some circumstances. So what's going on over here? One pshat is like this. The reason that we take the ear and we pierce a hole by the door is because the Torah teaches that the ear that heard at Har Sinai, that we are supposed to be slaves only to Hashem and Hashem alone, is supposed to be punished when he doesn't want to leave the master, human, a man, who now acts as an Adon, as a master. He says, this is the ear that heard on Har Sinai. Every single person, every Jewish person heard Hashem say, Ani Hashem Elokecha, I am your God. You be a servant only to me. This ear has to be pierced. But the other action is that why was the master punished in him being the one that has to poke the hole? It's because if this slave, after 6 years, doesn't want to leave, it means that there was a deficiency with the master himself. That there was a deficiency with the person's home and the environment that he was put in. How do we know? Is that the whole point of this rehabilitation, the whole point of making him serve us, making him serve you, is to teach him right from wrong. Is to teach him that you did something wrong that you weren't supposed to do, come to my home and be rehabilitated. But if he doesn't want to leave, it means that our home didn't teach those lessons. You know, there's 2 ways to teach a lesson. There's one way that I'm going to come and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to tell you what's right and what's wrong. But there's another way which speaks much, much louder, and that's the actions that we take. If the person within his own home wasn't able to teach this Eved Ivri what it means to be a free man, what it means to go and show this guy that he has to go and serve Hashem and Hashem alone, it means that the master is at fault as well. It means that he didn't properly communicate what it is to be an Eved Hashem. He didn't properly communicate what it means to be a servant to God himself. You know, you have so many times today that you have guys and fathers that tell their sons, go learn Torah. It's very important. Go and learn Torah. But they themselves don't learn. They themselves don't go out. They themselves don't show what it is to be a person that goes and learns Torah. They themselves, they don't show it. You know, there was one rabbi who came to a man. He grew up in the yeshiva system. He had a child, finally bar mitzvah age. And he says, listen, the rabbi comes up to him and he says, you know, is your son going to go and learn Torah? He says, yes, of course. I tell my son every day how important it is to go and learn. And he says, Rochi, sweetheart, he says, if you don't go and learn yourself, you know what your son's going to turn into? A person who's going to go and teach his son how important it is to learn Torah. And no one's going to go and do it, and no one's going to actually learn it, because talk is cheap. You know, there's a famous quote, I can't hear what you're telling me because your actions are speaking much, much louder. You know, for a person to go and show what it means to be a Ben Torah, it's much, much different in communication when we go and teach it intellectually. You know, I remember when I was in Israel with my wife, I went to Tzfat to my Rebbe, and he has a yeshiva, and he was going, and I remember just Erev Shabbos, everyone's preparing, there's a tumult, the whole of Tzfat is about to shut down, it's about to go into Shabbat mode, and I see my Rebbe, he's the Rosh Yeshiva of one of his yeshivas, he's going with the mop, and he's mopping the whole floor while all the yeshiva bachram are doing what they're doing. He's the one that held the mop, he's the one that mopped the whole floor of the yeshiva. And I learned the Musar from that, I learned a lesson from that. That it's one thing to sit and learn Gemara, it's one thing to shaig, it's one thing to teach and tell people, this is what you got to do, you got to help, you got to show, but it's another thing to teach with words that you have not spoken, with a word that has not been said, with an action that was acted through. How careful do we have to be with the way that we treat another person? And it reflects in our home. We want to teach our kids, we want to teach our spouses in our relationships, and our friends, how we ought to react and treat the USPS guy, the FedEx guy, right? The Instacart guy, whatever it is, to show them not by telling them, but with our actions. You know, when we try to teach our kids that when we get deliveries at the door, the USPS guy, the UPS guy, the Amazon guy is by our door every day, by the way. I don't know if anyone else has it. The Amazon delivery guy every day by our door. So we always tell them, we say, thank you so much. You know, thank you for doing what you're doing, bringing all the packages. So much so we're getting out of the car and I see my son, he comes out of the car, he says, thank you. I never once told him to say thank you to him. But he models what he sees. And that's what Parashat Mishpatim is teaching. He's saying that why do we pierce this guy's ear? And why is the master the one that has to do it? Because his home was deficient. Because he didn't model the behavior that he ought to teach. You know, when it says that we have to rehabilitate this Eved Ivri, it doesn't tell us that we have to go and bring him to a Daf Yomi. It doesn't tell him that we have to go and sit and learn Gemara with him. It says you have to bring him a pillow. It says you have to go and share the last piece of food that you have with this guy. That whatever you have, it goes to him. Half of it at least goes to him. That's what it shows. That's how you rehabilitate a person, to show that that's what it means to live a Torah life. To show by example and not by speech. You know, there's a fascinating story of a rabbi in Eretz Yisrael. And he was waiting in the waiting room of a doctor's office. And he's a religious guy, he's Rosh Yeshiva, he's wearing his hat, his jacket, his white shirt, his tie, the whole 9 yards. And he's sitting in the waiting room, and he sees this secular Israeli guy. He walks in. Secular Israeli guy, he has a tattoo on his arm, short sleeve shirts, whatever, walks in. And they're waiting in the same waiting room. And this secular Israeli guy, he pulls out a Gemara, Masechet Yevamot. It's one of the most challenging Masechtot in all of Shas. Pulls out Masechet Yevamot. And he's going and he's learning and he's steiging. And this rabbi is looking at this guy. He says, I don't understand. How did this happen? Like, what's going on over here? And then he sees in the corner of his eye, this secular Israeli guy, he stands up and he's about to approach the rabbi. He wants to ask him a question in the learning of Yevamot. Now you should know, there's always a moment in every rabbi's heart where a guy is going to come to ask him a question. And there's a fear that he might not know exactly how to answer this guy. Maybe he's not holding the sugya. He's not holding exactly what he's learning. But that, Baruch Hashem, he knew what he was doing. He read the sugya, he read it back and forward. He had the right answer. And he said, listen, you got to tell me what's going on over here. He said, you're not religious, are you? He said, no, I'm not religious. He said, what possessed you, a person like you, yourself, to come to a doctor's waiting room, pull out Masechet Yevamot, one of the most challenging Masechtot in Shas, and you're sitting and learning and steiging. What's going on over here? You got to tell me the story. He says, Rabbi, I'll tell you. He says, 6 months ago, I moved to this new apartment complex in Tel Aviv. Moved over there. I lived on the 8th floor. And he said, every day I would go upstairs. I would see this group of religious people. They would go into the neighboring apartment next door to me. Every single day at the same time, 6 p.m. He says, I don't understand. I stop one of these religious guys, one of these Hasidim, and I say, excuse me, like what's going on over here? What's going on in this apartment that every day at the same time you're going and you're meeting in this room, and the meeting in the apartment? He says, there's a young rabbi that just moved into the building. He's a rabbi in training, young rabbi. And he's doing Daf Yomi with us. So every day, 6 o'clock, we come, we learn Daf Yomi, we learn the page, we learn the Daf. He says, it's very nice, it's very geschmack, he's young, he's engaging, he knows how to engage the crowd, it's very beautiful. So the guy asks him, he says, would you mind if maybe I joined in once? He's like, I don't want to offend you, I'm not wearing a kippah, I'm not really dressed like you, but I would love to join, I would love to learn. He says, of course, come. So he says, Rabbi, I started coming, and I started being intrigued, I started understanding, like, what is this geschmack in learning? He says, and you know what? I started asking the rabbi questions. And the rabbi, every time I would ask a question, he would say, that's the question of the Pnei Yehoshua. Very good that you asked that question. And then the next day I would come back and he says, wow, that question that you asked, that's the question of the Maharsha. Very good. And he went to him after the class and he says, Rabbi, I don't understand. He says, I'm an engineer. He says, I studied my textbooks forward and backward for me to finally understand how to even begin to ask questions. He says, here in my first 3-4 weeks, I'm beginning to ask questions that are synchronizing with the Pnei Yehoshua, with the Maharsha. How can it be? How can it be that my questions, I know nothing, they're aligning with the questions of these Chachamim? How can it be? And he tells him like this. He says, Torah is not like any other chokhmah. It's not like any other work of knowledge. He says, when Hashem sees that you put your foot forward and want to learn it will open itself to you. When you show up to life, when you show up in a certain way that you are ready to accept whatever it is that you're about to learn, and you present yourself as such, then it presents itself to you because the Torah belongs to all of us. And it's not that all of a sudden now you've become smarter and there's a thing from Hashem that now you are lining your questions with Pnei Yehoshua. That's not the point. The point is that you've shown up differently. You showed up differently. And because a person shows up differently, the world reveals itself differently as well. So he says, you know what? Ever since then, I started coming back and I learned and I steiged. And never once did the rabbi ask me to put on a kippah. Never once. I've been going for a year now. We're learning Masechet Yevamot. And still to this day, he never asked me to put on a kippah. So he says, that's unbelievable. You have to tell me the name of this rabbi. I have to call him. I have to tell him like what the story is. So he gives him the name. He writes it down, and they leave in the doctor, and they leave. He goes after the doctor's appointment. He goes into the phone book, if anyone remembers what that is. He looks up the name in the phone book. He looks up the name of the rabbi. He calls him up. He says, Rabbi, I just met your Talmud. He says he came in the doctor's office. He's learning, no kippah. He's like, you got to tell me the story. He says he came in, he was learning, and to this day, we never bothered him. So the rabbi was telling him, he says, listen, you're young, you're a rabbi in training. The more he comes to learn after a year, 2 years, it's going to get more and more difficult to not tell him to put on a kippah, to not tell him to do whatever it is. But I'm going to ask you, don't pressure him. Don't tell him to put on a kippah. Tell him to keep learning, tell him to keep growing, tell him to keep steiging, to be who he is. He says, Rabbi, we're way ahead of you. He said, from the first day, we all made a pact. He said, even if this guy comes for 10 years, we're never going to ask him to put on a kippah. He says, amazing. He says, please tell me, I need to know. If there's ever updates with this man, call me, I want to know. He says, no problem. 3 months later, this rabbi from the doctor's office, he gets a phone call from this rabbi in training. He says, you asked me to call you, give you an update. I want to give you an update. This man, the one without a kippah, he shows up to my house one day after the shiur with his wife. And he says, Rabbi, I want you to come over to my house and convert my kitchen. I want to eat everything kosher. Kosher my pots, kosher my pans. Whatever food that I have that's treif, that's not kosher, I want to throw it away. I want to keep a kosher kitchen. He says, no problem. He says he went, koshered the kitchen, the sink, the oven, the pans, everything. And they continued keeping kosher. He says he came back 3, 4, 5 months later. He says, I want to take my children and I want to take them out of secular school. I want to put them into Jewish day schools. I want to put them into yeshivas. And he says, you know what? All these changes that he made, the kosher kitchen, the yeshiva day school, everything, he still didn't put on a kippah. No one ever said a word. No one ever taught him that that was what you needed to do. That you needed to go and enforce certain rules of strictness, of deen, of halakha. This is what has to happen. They let him grow at his own pace like a flower in a garden. He says, you grow in your direction. All my job is to do is to lead, is to show you what it is to live a Torah life. And from then on, you take the reins. And that's what it was. This man's barrier to entry, it wasn't to just go and accumulate knowledge. It wasn't to just go and say, what is this Torah have to teach me? What can I gain from it? It's how can I grow from it? It's how can I be a better person? It's if every day in my life I have interactions and I teach people how they ought to treat me. I teach people how they ought to treat me and I treat other people in a certain modicum of way. But what does it mean to make and live a Kiddush Hashem? What does it mean to teach another person without saying a word? That's Parashat Mishpatim. Hashem says, you're free people. You're now a nation unto yourselves. Time belongs to you. Achodesh hazeh lachem. Now time is yours. You are free. You're a ben chori. But the only way to teach is to model the behavior that you want to see in others. You want to show what it means to be a Talmid Chacham, to be a masmid, someone who learns and steigs and grows. You be that person first within yourself. And from then on, your circle of influence, your area, everyone around you will learn only by one way, and that's osmosis. When people see how you act, that's the best and most effective way for anyone to learn the information that you want to convey to another. So the Bali Musar, they teach like this. They say Torah is important to learn, of course, to go, Shnai Mikra, to be Kovei Eitim La Torah, to understand all what it has to be. But the person that you have to become from it and evolve through its learning is much more important than the knowledge that you gain from the words on the page. He says more than you'll gain from the words on the page is the mensch that you'll become, and the families that you raise, and the women and the men that you're going to get into a relationship with, and the kids that you'll grow, and all the people around you that you're going to grow and teach. He says that's what it means to live and lead a Torah life. It means to show and lead by example. That's why one of the first halachot that we learn after Mitziat Mitzrayim, after we receive the Torah, is Eved Ivri. Hashem says this guy didn't want to leave because the man's home was defective. Because the guy didn't live the way he ought to have lived. To show what it is to be a Ben Chori, to show what it means to be a free man. So B'ezrat Hashem, with this, we should be zocheh to not only understand what the halacha is and what the deen is and what it means to lead a life that looks religious, but the panimi, with the inside, the neshama, what it really means to show up every day as a better version of ourselves, to show what it means to work on ourselves and our midot and our character traits, to understand that the real miracle in life is to really overcome even one bad midah is greater than learning all the Torah kula. We should be zocheh B'ezrat Hashem. Thank you.